What happens when a woman walks down the aisle knowing she's about to marry the wrong brother? Today, we're diving into a story of forbidden love, impossible choices, and the moment one woman decided her heart mattered more than her reputation. Stay until the end to find out how this scandalous wedding day changed everything. And if you're watching from New York, London, Tokyo, or anywhere else, drop your city in the comments. Hit that like button and let's get started. The corset was too tight. Eliza Whitmore stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom, unable to breathe properly, which felt somehow appropriate. She hadn't been able to breathe freely in years. The ivory silk gown they'd commissioned for her wedding hung like a shroud, beautiful and suffocating all at once. 4 women fussed around her, adjusting lace, pinning flowers into her hair, murmuring about how perfect everything looked. Perfect. That word again. "You're trembling, dear," her mother's voice cut through the room, sharp despite its honeyed tone. Lady Catherine Whitmore stood near the window, already dressed in deep burgundy, her face a carefully composed mask of maternal satisfaction. "Surely you're not having second thoughts?" It wasn't really a question. It was a warning. "No, Mother." Eliza's voice came out steady, practiced. She'd gotten good at lying over the years. "Just excited." "Good. The Ashford family has been more than generous with this arrangement. Your father and I have worked tirelessly to secure this match. Marcus is a good man from an excellent family. You understand what this means for us, don't you?" Eliza understood perfectly. It meant her younger sister Emily would have her debut next season without the stain of an unwed older sister hanging over the family. It meant her father's business dealings with the Ashford estate would solidify into something permanent and profitable. It meant her mother could finally stop throwing desperate, increasingly transparent house parties designed to parade Eliza before potential suitors. It meant Eliza would spend the rest of her life as Mrs. Marcus Ashford, a title that felt like a prison sentence. "I understand," she said. "Lovely. Then stop fidgeting with your gloves. You'll ruin them." Eliza hadn't realized she'd been twisting the delicate fabric between her fingers. She forced her hands to still, folded them in front of her like a porcelain doll, and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was beautiful in that distant, untouchable way that society portraits always captured, all smooth surfaces and no depth. Her dark hair had been arranged in elaborate curls, her face painted with just enough rouge and powder to look natural, which really meant acceptable. She looked like a bride. She felt like a sacrifice. "5 minutes, my lady." One of the maids bobbed a curtsy and slipped from the room. 5 minutes. 300 seconds until she walked out of this room and into a future she hadn't chosen. Eliza closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time she'd made a real decision about her own life. Had it been when she was 12? 15? There had been a moment, she thought, when she'd wanted to study music seriously, to perhaps teach piano. Her mother had laughed, actually laughed, and said no one of breeding needed to work. And besides, too much education made women disagreeable. So Eliza had learned to be agreeable instead. She'd learned to smile when she wanted to scream, to nod when she wanted to argue, to accept when she wanted to refuse. 23 years of slow, careful training had led her to this moment, standing in a dress that cost more than most families earned in a year, about to marry a man she barely knew. Marcus Ashford was kind. She could say that honestly. In the 6 months since their engagement had been announced, he'd been nothing but courteous. He brought her flowers. He made polite conversation. He never pushed beyond what was proper. He was everything a woman in her position should want, and Eliza felt absolutely nothing when she looked at him. "It's time." Her father appeared in the doorway, already in his formal coat, his mustache freshly waxed. Lord Edmund Whitmore had the look of a man who'd just closed a successful business deal, which, Eliza supposed, he had. "You look beautiful, my dear. Your mother and I are very proud." Proud, as if she'd accomplished something, as if agreeing to be sold off like a prized mare was an achievement. But she smiled anyway. "Thank you, Father." He offered his arm. She took it, and together they walked down the hallway of Whitmore Manor toward the grand staircase that would lead her to the waiting carriages, the chapel, the altar, and the rest of her carefully orchestrated life. The house was a flurry of activity, servants rushing with last-minute preparations, distant relatives already gathering in the drawing room for champagne, her sister Emily peeking out from behind a door with a mixture of excitement and envy in her eyes. Eliza caught her gaze for just a moment. Emily was 17, still convinced that marriage to a wealthy man was the ultimate fairy tale ending. She'd learn soon enough. They descended the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. The front doors stood open, revealing the row of carriages waiting to transport the wedding party to St. Michael's Chapel. It was a perfect autumn day, the kind of crisp, golden afternoon that seemed designed for special occasions. Leaves drifted lazily from the old oak trees lining the drive. The sky was impossibly blue. Eliza wanted to hate it. She wanted rain, storms, some kind of atmospheric sympathy for the turmoil churning inside her. Instead, nature itself seemed to be mocking her with its cheerful indifference. "Careful of your hem," her mother instructed from behind. "Don't drag it through the gravel," because heaven forbid she damaged the dress. That would be the real tragedy. The led carriage was decorated with white ribbons and autumn flowers, chrysanthemums and late-blooming roses. It looked like something out of a storybook, which was exactly the point. This whole production was about appearances, about creating the perfect picture of aristocratic romance for everyone to admire and envy. Reality didn't matter. Only the performance did. Eliza climbed into the carriage with her father's assistance. The seats were plush velvet, ridiculously comfortable for such a short journey. Her father settled across from her, adjusting his coat with the self-satisfaction of a man who'd successfully managed a difficult negotiation. "You'll be very happy, Eliza, he said as the carriage lurched forward. "The Ashfords are good people. Marcus has excellent prospects. You'll want for nothing. Except love," she thought. "Except passion. Except any sense that my life belongs to me." But she said, "I know, Father. Thank you." The chapel was only a 15-minute drive from the manor, but it felt like hours. Eliza watched the familiar countryside roll past, the same hills and hedgerows she'd known all her life, now taking on the quality of a farewell. After today, she'd live at Ashford Hall, miles away, in rooms she'd never seen, surrounded by servants who'd judge her every move, expected to produce heirs and manage a household, and be the perfect wife to a perfect stranger. Her chest tightened again. The corset, she told herself. Just the corset. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. St. Michael's came into view, its stone spire rising against the blue sky like an accusatory finger. Carriages already lined the drive. The Ashfords had arrived early, along with what looked like half the county's aristocracy. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a social event, a spectacle, a merger of two prominent families that everyone wanted to witness. Eliza's stomach turned. The carriage stopped. She could hear the murmur of voices outside, the rustle of expensive fabric, the forced laughter of people performing their own roles in this elaborate theater. Her father opened the door and stepped out first, then turned to help her down. The moment her feet touched the ground, everything became terrifyingly real. People were staring. Of course they were. She was the bride. That's what people did. But their eyes felt like weights pressing down on her, measuring her, judging whether she lived up to the gossip, whether the Whitmore girl was worth all this fuss. She recognized faces from countless dinner parties and balls. Lady Hartwell with her perpetual sneer, Lord and Lady Morrison looking appropriately impressed, the Pemberton twins whispering behind their fans. Everyone had an opinion. No one actually cared how she felt. "Smile, darling," her mother materialized beside her, already orchestrating. "Remember, gracious but not giddy, confident but not proud. In other words, be perfect. Be what everyone expects. Be anything except yourself." Eliza arranged her face into the appropriate expression, soft, happy, demure, and let herself be swept toward the chapel entrance. The doors stood open, revealing the interior dressed in white and gold. Candles flickered along the walls. Flower arrangements exploded from every available surface. And at the far end of the aisle, standing before the altar with the vicar, was Marcus Ashford. He looked nervous. His collar seemed too tight, and he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. When he caught sight of her, he smiled, a genuine, almost boyish expression that made him look younger than his 26 years. He deserved better than this, Eliza thought with a sudden pang of guilt. He deserved someone who actually wanted to marry him. But that wasn't how their world worked. Desire was irrelevant. Duty was everything. "Are you ready?" her father asked, offering his arm once more. No, never, not even close. Yes, Eliza said. The wedding march began. The congregation rose as one, turning to watch her entrance, and Eliza Whitmore began the longest walk of her life. Each step down that aisle felt like a betrayal of herself, of any hope she'd ever harbored that life might offer something more than this prescribed path. The faces on either side blurred together into a wall of expectation. She could hear her mother's breathing behind her, sharp and satisfied. She could feel her father's pride radiating through his formal coat. Marcus watched her approach with an expression somewhere between hope and terror, which at least felt honest. But then, just for a moment, as she passed the third row of pews, Eliza's gaze drifted to the left side of the chapel. And there, standing alone near the wall in a dark coat that seemed designed to help him blend into the shadows, was Darian Blackwood, Marcus's older brother. Their eyes met for less than a second, but it was enough. Enough for Eliza's careful composure to crack. Enough for her breath to catch in a way that had nothing to do with the corset. Enough for her to remember with painful clarity why this wedding felt like dying. Because 3 weeks ago, before all this became inevitable and inescapable, she had been someone else. She had been free, truly free, for one perfect, impossible afternoon. And Darian had been there. He looked away first, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. He wore the same expression he'd had that last day in the field when he told her he was leaving, that he couldn't stay, that some things weren't meant to be. Eliza forced her gaze back to Marcus, to the altar, to the future that had been decided for her. But the damage was done. That one glimpse had shattered the numbness she'd been carefully cultivating, had reminded her of everything she was about to lose. She reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Marcus's with all the ceremony of transferring property. Marcus's palm was slightly sweaty. He squeezed her fingers gently, encouragingly, and she tried to return the pressure but couldn't quite manage it. The vicar began his speech about holy matrimony and sacred bonds and lifelong commitment. The words washed over Eliza like water over stone, present but not penetrating. She stood perfectly still, the ideal image of a blushing bride, while inside she was screaming. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading. Once the vows were spoken, there would be no going back, no escape, no possibility of anything different. She would become Mrs. Marcus Ashford, and Eliza Whitmore, whoever she might have been, whatever she might have wanted, would cease to exist. Marriage, the vicar intoned, is not to be entered into lightly but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Lightly. As if anyone had asked whether she wanted this. As if her feelings had ever been part of the equation. Marcus looked at her with something like affection, and Eliza felt a wave of sadness so profound it nearly buckled her knees. He was a good man. He would try to make her happy, but he could never give her what she needed because he didn't know what that was. She barely knew herself. All she knew was that this perfect, proper, socially acceptable union felt like suffocation. If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, the vicar continued, following the ancient script, speak now or forever hold your peace. It was ceremonial. No one ever spoke. That moment of silence was just another performance, a theatrical pause before the inevitable conclusion. But this time, the silence stretched and stretched. And in that impossible, suspended moment, Eliza felt something shift in the air behind her, a tension, a presence, a gathering storm. She didn't dare turn around. She didn't dare hope. Because if she was wrong, if she'd imagined it, the disappointment would destroy her. Marcus squeezed her hand again, oblivious, already thinking ahead to the vows. The vicar prepared to continue, and then, I object. The words fell into the chapel like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled crowd. Gasps erupted, heads whipped around, and Eliza's heart stopped beating entirely. Because she recognized that voice. It wasn't Darian. It was Marcus himself. Her groom had just objected to his own wedding. Eliza finally turned, her mind reeling, unable to process what was happening. Marcus had dropped her hand and taken a step back. His face had gone pale, but his expression was determined, almost relieved. I'm sorry, he said, and he was looking at her with something that might have been pity or respect or both. But I can't do this. The chapel erupted into chaos. Her mother shrieked. Her father surged forward. The congregation exploded into frantic whispers. And somewhere in the confusion, Eliza caught sight of Darian again, still standing in the shadows, his face a mask of controlled anguish. "What is the meaning of this?" Lord Ashford, Marcus's father, pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. "Marcus, have you lost your mind?" "Probably," Marcus said with a shaky laugh. "But at least I found my conscience." "Conscience? This is a disgrace, an absolute—" "This entire arrangement is a disgrace." Marcus's voice grew stronger. "We've been lying to ourselves, to each other, to everyone here. This marriage shouldn't happen, not like this." Eliza couldn't speak, couldn't move. She was trapped in a nightmare that had somehow become more surreal than the waking world. Her mother reached her side, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "Fix this," she hissed. "Say something. Do something. You cannot let this fall apart." But Eliza had no words, no script for this scenario. For the first time in her carefully controlled life, there was no appropriate response, no perfect thing to say. "Marcus, please." It was Lady Ashford now, trying for reason. "You're overwrought. The nerves are normal. Let's just—" "It's not nerves, Mother." Marcus looked around the chapel, at all the shocked, horrified, fascinated faces. "It's truth, and I'm tired of running from it." He turned to Eliza then, and his eyes were kind. "You deserve better than this," he said quietly. "Better than a husband who's marrying you out of duty. Better than a life built on obligation instead of love." "How dare you humiliate this family?" Lord Ashford thundered. "The contracts are signed. The agreements are made. You will—" "The agreements can be unmade." This new voice cut through the chaos like a blade, and everyone fell silent, because Darian Blackwood had finally stepped forward from the shadows. He moved through the crowd with the kind of authority that made people unconsciously step aside. His presence filled the chapel in a way Marcus's never had, darker, more intense, impossible to ignore. He reached the altar and stood beside his brother, and the family resemblance was clear even though they were nothing alike. Where Marcus was fair and open, Darian was dark and closed off. Where Marcus inspired affection, Darian commanded respect, and where Marcus had the comfortable bearing of a man who'd always been loved, Darian carried himself like someone who'd learned early that the world was hostile and unforgiving. "This is not your concern, Darian," Lord Ashford said, his voice shaking with fury. "You gave up your place in this family. You have no right—" "I have every right." Darian's voice was calm, controlled, deadly. "Because the truth Marcus is trying to tell you, the reason this wedding should never have been arranged in the first place, involves me." Eliza's heart thundered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This couldn't be happening. This was impossible. Darian had left. He had disappeared 3 weeks ago, precisely to avoid this moment, to prevent this confrontation. What had changed? "You're not making sense," Lady Whitmore snapped, though her voice had gone shrill with panic. She could sense the situation spiraling out of control, the perfect wedding collapsing into scandal. "This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me." Darian's gaze found Eliza's, and for the first time since she'd entered the chapel, she felt like she could breathe. "Because I'm the one she loves." The gasps this time were deafening. Eliza heard her mother make a sound like a wounded animal. Her father looked ready to commit murder. And Marcus was smiling, actually smiling as if an enormous weight had just lifted from his shoulders. "No," Lady Whitmore was saying, over and over. "No, this is absurd. This is a fantasy. Eliza would never— she's too sensible to—" "Is it true?" Her father's voice cut through the hysteria, cold and sharp as winter. He was looking directly at Eliza now, his face a thundercloud. "Is what he's saying true?" Every eye in the chapel turned to her. Hundreds of people waiting for her response, waiting to see if she would confirm or deny the accusation. Waiting to judge her. This was it. The moment everything hung in the balance, she could deny it, play the victim, claim Darian was delusional or cruel or trying to ruin the wedding out of spite. She could salvage this situation, marry Marcus anyway, and lock away whatever feelings she had for his brother in the deepest vault of her heart. She could be dutiful, obedient, perfect. Or Eliza met Darian's eyes across the chaos, and in them she saw something she'd never seen in Marcus's: recognition, understanding, a reflection of her own desperate hope that life could be more than just survival. She took a breath that felt like the first real breath of her life. "Yes," she said. "It's true." The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Yes. Eliza had expected chaos after her confession, but what followed was worse than chaos. It was calculated destruction. Her mother's face went white, then red, then a mottled purple that suggested an imminent collapse. Her father's hand moved toward his chest, as if checking whether his heart was still beating. And the congregation transformed from shocked observers into a feeding frenzy of whispers, gasps, and barely concealed glee at witnessing the scandal of the season unfold in real time. "You foolish, wicked girl!" Her mother's voice came out strangled, barely human. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Catherine, please." Lady Ashford stepped forward, her own face pale but composed. She was trying to salvage something from the wreckage, though what exactly remained unclear. "Perhaps we should move this discussion somewhere more private." "Private?" Lord Whitmore's roar cut through the chapel. "Half the county just heard my daughter confess to whatever this depraved situation is. There's no privacy left to protect." Darian hadn't moved from his position near the altar. He stood like a stone pillar, his jaw set, his eyes locked on Eliza as if she were the only person in the room. The crowd surged between them, shocked relatives, outraged parents, the vicar looking thoroughly lost. But his gaze never wavered. Marcus touched Eliza's arm gently. "Are you all right?" The question was so absurd under the circumstances that Eliza almost laughed. "All right?" Her world was imploding. Her family was disowning her in front of everyone they'd ever known. The marriage that was supposed to secure her future had just spectacularly fallen apart, and the man she actually loved was standing 10 feet away while a wall of aristocratic fury built between them. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Well," Marcus managed a weak smile. "At least you're being truthful now. This is your fault." Lord Ashford rounded on Darian with the kind of rage that came from years of disappointment finally finding its target. "You couldn't leave well enough alone. You had to destroy this family one more time." "I didn't destroy anything that wasn't already broken," Darian said quietly. His voice carried, despite its softness, something about the timbre demanded attention. "This marriage was a mistake from the beginning." "How dare you!" Lady Whitmore had found her voice again, shrill and vicious. "You seduced an innocent girl, corrupted her, turned her against her own family and her sacred duty." "I didn't seduce anyone." Darian's eyes flashed dangerously. "What happened between Eliza and me was—" "Stop!" Eliza surprised herself with the force of the word. Everyone turned to stare at her again, but this time she didn't shrink under the attention. "Just stop. All of you." Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her sides, trying to steady herself, trying to find the courage that had allowed her to speak the truth moments ago. It felt like it was draining away with every passing second, replaced by the creeping realization of what she'd just done. "Eliza, darling." Her mother's tone had shifted to something dangerously sweet, the voice she used when trying to manipulate rather than command. "You're confused, overwrought. Wedding nerves have clearly affected your judgment. If we just—" "I'm not confused." "You are. You must be. Because no daughter of mine would throw away everything, her reputation, her family, her future, for some ridiculous notion of romantic love." There it was. The core truth that her mother had been dancing around for years. Love didn't matter. Love was a frivolous indulgence for people who couldn't afford to think practically. Love was the enemy of everything their world stood for. "Maybe I'm not the daughter you wanted then," Eliza said. Her mother recoiled as if slapped. "How can you say that? After everything we've done for you, the sacrifices we've made?" "What sacrifices?" The words burst out before Eliza could stop them. "You arranged a marriage that benefited father's business interests. You planned a wedding that would enhance your social standing. When exactly did you sacrifice anything for me? We gave you everything, her father cut in, his voice hard as iron. Education, comfort, position. We raised you to be a lady of quality, to understand your responsibilities. You raised me to be obedient. There's a difference. Obedience is a virtue, Lady Whitmore snapped. Something you clearly never learned properly. The crowd had gone silent now, straining to hear every word of this family implosion. Eliza could feel their eyes on her, judging, measuring, already composing the gossip they'd spread the moment they left the chapel. The Whitmore girl had gone mad, threw away a perfectly good marriage for the black sheep brother. Always knew there was something not quite right about her. Let them talk. She was tired of caring what they thought. I want everyone out. Lord Ashford's voice boomed through the chapel with surprising authority. This is a family matter. Out. Now. For a moment, nobody moved. The prospect of missing the rest of this spectacular drama was too much to bear. But Lord Ashford was still a powerful man with powerful connections, and eventually self-preservation won over curiosity. The congregation began to shuffle toward the exits, casting backward glances, whispering furiously to each other. Emily appeared at Eliza's side, her young face stricken. Eliza, what's happening? What did you do? Go with Mother, Eliza said gently. But, please, Em, just go. Her sister hesitated, then let herself be pulled away by a servant. Within minutes, the chapel had emptied of everyone except the immediate families, the vicar, who looked like he desperately wished he could leave too, and a handful of servants standing uncertainly near the walls. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the chaos. Lord Ashford turned to Darian with cold fury. I should have known you'd find a way to ruin this. It's what you do best, isn't it? Destroying everything you touch. Father, Marcus started, but Darian held up a hand. Let him speak. He's been waiting years to say this. Years? I've spent decades cleaning up your messes. Decades watching you squander every advantage, reject every opportunity, turn your back on this family and everything we stand for, and now you've corrupted an innocent girl to satisfy whatever twisted... Enough! The word came out like a whip crack. Darian's composure finally cracked, revealing the rage beneath. You want to blame me for your failures as a father? Fine, but leave Eliza out of it. Leave her out of it? She's standing here in a wedding dress meant for my other son, confessing she loves you instead. How exactly am I supposed to leave her out of it? She had a choice, Darian said. Maybe for the first time in her life. And she made it. A choice? Lord Whitmore laughed bitterly. She made a catastrophic mistake based on whatever lies you fed her during your sordid affair. It wasn't sordid, Eliza said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. And it wasn't an affair. Then what was it? Her mother demanded. Enlighten us, darling. What exactly has been happening behind our backs? Eliza looked at Darian. He gave the smallest nod, as if to say, Your choice. Tell them or don't. I'll stand by either decision. She took a breath. 3 weeks ago, she began, I went riding alone. I needed to think, to get away from all the wedding preparations and the pressure and the constant reminders of what was expected of me. I rode out to the old fields near Hartley Woods. You know the ones, Father, where the land dips down toward the stream. Her father's face was stone. He knew those fields. He also knew she'd been forbidden to ride there alone because the terrain was unpredictable. My horse startled at something, a rabbit maybe, or a bird. I lost my seat and fell. She could still remember the sickening moment of airborne helplessness, the impact that knocked the wind from her lungs. The horse ran off. I'd twisted my ankle badly enough that I couldn't walk, and that's when Darian found me. She'd been sitting there in the grass, furious and embarrassed and close to tears, when he'd appeared on his own horse like something out of a story. Except he hadn't been a knight in shining armor, just a man in travel-worn clothes who happened to be passing through on his way to somewhere else. He helped me, Eliza continued, got me on his horse, took me to the old groundskeeper's cottage so I could rest. We talked while we waited for my ankle to recover enough to ride back. Talked, her mother repeated with venomous skepticism. Yes, talked. About real things, not weather or gossip or who said what at which party. He asked me what I wanted from life. No one had ever asked me that before. Because it's not relevant, Lord Whitmore said flatly. What you want is irrelevant to what you need to do. Maybe that's the problem. The cottage had been empty for years, dusty and quiet, with afternoon light slanting through the broken shutters. Darian had built a small fire, made tea from supplies he'd been carrying, and then, instead of making awkward small talk or trying to rush her back home, he'd simply asked, "So, who are you when nobody's watching?" The question had undone something inside her. Maybe it was the pain in her ankle, or the shock of the fall, or the sheer unexpected kindness of a stranger who asked her opinion like it mattered. But she'd answered honestly for the first time in years. "I went back the next day," Eliza admitted. "And the day after that. We met at the cottage, talked. That's all. Just talked." "Just talked," her father echoed. "For 3 weeks you snuck off to meet a man in secret, and you expect us to believe nothing inappropriate occurred? Believe what you want. It's the truth." What she didn't say, what she couldn't say in front of this hostile audience, was that those conversations had felt more intimate than any physical contact ever could have. Darian had listened to her in a way no one else had. He'd challenged her assumptions, questioned her resignation, made her realize that the cage she lived in was at least partially of her own construction. "I didn't know who he was at first," she continued. "He never said his name, never mentioned his family. We were just two people talking honestly." Marcus made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close. "That sounds like Darian, always running from the name." "I wasn't running," Darian said quietly. "I was trying to stay away." "Then why did you come back?" Lord Ashford's voice dripped with accusation. "If you were so noble, so determined to stay away, why return now?" "Because I couldn't let her make this mistake." "The mistake is yours," Lady Whitmore hissed, "and now my daughter will pay the price for your selfishness." "She was already paying a price," Darian shot back. "Marrying a man she doesn't love, living a life she doesn't want, all to satisfy your ambitions. At least now she has a choice." "A choice?" Lord Whitmore's laugh was ugly. "What choice does she have now? She's ruined. Utterly ruined. No decent man will have her after this scandal. She'll be a social pariah, an embarrassment. Then I'll marry her." The words fell into the room like a bomb. Everyone froze. Even Eliza, who'd been hoping against hope to hear exactly that, felt the shock of it ripple through her. "You?" Lord Ashford looked like he might have a stroke. "You think I'd allow you anywhere near this family after what you've done?" "I'm not asking permission." "You have nothing to offer her. No position, no income, no prospects. You threw all that away years ago when you refused your responsibilities." "I have enough." "Enough for what? To drag her down into whatever hole you've been living in? To condemn her to a life of poverty and shame?" "To give her a life where she can breathe," Darian said. "That's more than you're offering." Marcus had been watching this exchange with growing frustration. Now he stepped forward, positioning himself between his father and his brother. "This isn't about money or position. This is about you being angry that Darian won't bend to your will." "Stay out of this, Marcus." "No, I won't. Because I'm the one who stopped the wedding, remember? I'm the one who couldn't go through with a marriage built on lies." "You're a fool," his father spat. "A romantic fool who's thrown away the best match you could have made." "Maybe. But at least I'm an honest fool." Lady Ashford, who'd been silent throughout most of this, finally spoke. Her voice was tired, sad. "Marcus, darling, you don't understand the consequences of what you've done. The contracts, the agreements can be broken. Should be broken. Mother, look at her." Marcus gestured to Eliza. "Really look at her. She's been miserable for months. I've known it. She's known it. Probably half the county's known it. We were both going through the motions because it was expected, because it was safe. But that's not enough." "Safe is all we have," Lady Ashford said softly. "Without it, we have chaos. Without it, we have freedom," Darian countered. "Freedom." Lord Whitmore turned the word into something obscene. "You want to lecture us about freedom? You, who abandoned every duty, every responsibility, who ran away from everything that mattered?" "I ran from you," Darian said flatly. "From your expectations and your demands, and your absolute certainty that your way was the only way. I'm not running anymore." The vicar cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps, that is, if I might suggest, there are legal matters to consider. The contracts, as Lady Ashford mentioned." "Damn the contracts," Darian said. Language, his mother murmured automatically, then seemed to realize how ridiculous that was under the circumstances. Eliza's head was spinning. Everything was happening too fast. Minutes ago, she'd been walking down the aisle toward a predetermined future. Now that future had exploded into fragments, and she was standing in the wreckage with no idea what came next. "I need air," she said suddenly. I can't." She turned and walked toward the side door of the chapel, not caring if anyone followed. Her ankle twinged. It still wasn't fully healed from the original fall, but she ignored it. The door opened onto a small courtyard garden, usually used for quiet reflection, now offering escape. The autumn air hit her face like a blessing. She leaned against the stone wall, trying to steady her breathing, trying to process what had just happened. Footsteps behind her. She knew without looking it was Darian. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For causing this. For not staying away like I should have." Eliza turned to face him. Up close, away from the chaos, she could see the strain in his features, the dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept in days, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "I'm not sorry," she said. "You should be. Your parents are right about one thing. This has destroyed your reputation. After today, society will—" "I don't care about society." "You say that now. But when the invitations stop coming, when your friends turn away, when you realize what you've lost—" "What have I lost?" The question came out sharper than she intended. A loveless marriage? A life of pretending? The approval of people who never actually cared about me? Your family was willing to sell me to the highest bidder as long as the alliance benefited them. Darian flinched. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" Eliza stepped closer. "You asked me once what I wanted. Do you remember? In the cottage, that first day. You asked who I was when nobody was watching. Well, nobody's watching now. This is who I am, someone who'd rather have truth and scandal than comfort and lies. Truth doesn't pay bills. Scandal doesn't keep you warm at night. Is that what you're offering? Bills and warmth? How romantic." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "I'm trying to be realistic. I've been realistic my entire life. Look where it got me." The door burst open. Lord Whitmore emerged, his face still thunderous, with Lady Whitmore close behind. "Eliza, you will come home immediately. We're leaving." "No," Eliza said. Her mother blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no, I'm not going home with you." "Don't be absurd. Where else would you go?" "I don't know yet. But not back to Whitmore Manor. Not to sit in my room while you plan how to salvage this situation. Not to be lectured about duty and obligation and everything I've done wrong." "You are my daughter," Lord Whitmore said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will do as you're told." "Or what? You'll disown me? Seems like you've already made that decision." Her father's hand twitched, and for a horrible moment Eliza thought he might actually strike her. But he caught himself, forced his hand down, and instead delivered something worse. "If you leave with him," he said, pointing at Darian, "you are no longer a Whitmore. You will have no claim to our name, our property, our support. You will be dead to this family. Do you understand?" The words should have hurt. Maybe they did, somewhere beneath the numbness. But mostly Eliza felt a strange sense of liberation. This was it, the final break. No more compromises or half-measures. "I understand," she said. Her mother made a wounded sound. "Eliza, please, think about what you're doing. You're throwing away everything for what? A man you barely know? Some romantic fantasy that won't survive the winter?" "Catherine." Lady Ashford had followed them outside. She looked older suddenly, worn down by the disaster. "Let her go." "Let her go. She's my daughter. She's confused. She needs to make her own mistakes." Lady Ashford turned to Eliza with something that might have been sympathy or might have been pity. "You're very brave or very foolish, my dear. I'm not sure which, but you've made your choice. Now you'll have to live with it." "I know." "Do you?" Lord Whitmore's voice was cold now, empty of emotion. "Do you understand what this means? You'll have nothing. No money, no position, no family to support you when this romantic dream turns into a nightmare." "She'll have me." Darian stepped forward, positioning himself beside Eliza. And I'll have enough for both of us. Enough? Lord Whitmore laughed bitterly. You have nothing. You're nobody. What can you possibly offer her? For the first time since this confrontation began, Darian smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. More than you ever did. I can offer her freedom. Freedom to starve. Freedom to be shunned. Freedom to regret every choice that led her to this moment. Maybe, but they'll be her choices, not yours. The standoff lasted another few heartbeats. Then Lord Whitmore turned to his wife. Catherine, we're leaving. Edmund, now. Lady Whitmore cast one last desperate look at Eliza, and in her eyes was something Eliza had never seen before. Fear. Not for herself, but for her daughter. Real, genuine concern beneath all the anger and disappointment. Be careful, she whispered, then louder, hardening her voice again. You've made your choice. Live with it. They left. Just walked away, back through the chapel, leaving Eliza standing in the courtyard with Darian and the ruins of everything she'd ever known. Marcus appeared in the doorway. They're gone. Father, too. He's not handling this well. That's an understatement, Darian muttered. What about you? Eliza asked Marcus. Are you all right? He considered the question. Honestly, I'm relieved. Guilty, but relieved. I should have stopped this weeks ago. I knew something was wrong, the way you looked when we were together, like you were somewhere else. I just didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry. Please don't apologize. We were both trapped in something neither of us wanted. At least now we're free. Free, Eliza repeated. The word felt foreign. Dangerous. Marcus pulled an envelope from his coat. I came out here to give you this. It's not much, but it's what I had in my account. Consider it a wedding gift, or a freedom gift. Whatever you want to call it. Marcus, I can't. You can. You'll need it. Father's frozen all the household accounts, and I doubt the Whitmores are feeling generous right now. He pressed the envelope into her hands. Take it, please. Eliza looked down at the envelope, then back at Marcus. Thank you. You deserve to be happy, both of you. He glanced at Darian. Take care of her, or I'll find you and make you regret it. Understood, Darian said quietly. Marcus nodded, then turned and walked back into the chapel, leaving them alone again. Eliza stared at the envelope in her hands. Inside was probably enough money to survive for a few months if they were careful. After that, what now? She asked. Darian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but laced with uncertainty. I have a cottage, about 50 miles north near the coast. It's small, remote. Not what you're used to. Tell me about it. It's stone, 2 rooms. The roof leaks when it rains hard. There's a village about 3 miles away where I do odd jobs. Carpentry, repairs, whatever people need. It's not glamorous. Is there a library? He blinked at the question. What? In the village. Is there a library or a bookshop? Yes, a small lending library. Why? Because I'll need something to do, and I've always wanted to read without someone telling me what's appropriate. She looked at him directly. Will you teach me things? Real things, not just social graces? Like what? I don't know. How to fix a roof when it leaks. How to cook something more complicated than tea. How to survive without servants and social calendars and people managing my life. That's a lot to learn. I know, but I want to try. She paused. With you. If you'll have me. Darian reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm against hers. Are you sure? Once we leave here, once this is done, there's no going back. Your parents meant what they said. I know. You'll be giving up everything. No, Eliza said. I'll be giving up nothing. I'll be gaining everything. He pulled her close, and for the first time since this entire catastrophe began, Eliza felt something like peace settle over her. It wouldn't last, she knew that. There would be hard days ahead, regrets and struggles and moments of doubt. But right now, standing in a chapel courtyard in a ruined wedding dress with the man she loved, she felt more alive than she had in years. "We should go," Darian said, "before someone else decides to have an opinion about our choices." "How do we get to this cottage?" "I have a horse. You'll have to ride behind me." Eliza laughed, actually laughed, at the absurdity of it. "Just like the first day." "Nothing like the first day. This time you know exactly what you're choosing." They walked back through the chapel together. It was empty now except for the vicar, who was gathering his things with obvious relief that this ordeal was over. He looked up as they passed, opened his mouth as if to say something, then apparently thought better of it and just nodded. Outside, Darian's horse was tied near the road. It was a sturdy animal, not beautiful or prestigious, just practical, like everything else in the life Eliza was choosing. She looked back at the chapel one last time. Through the open doors, she could see the flowers still arranged around the altar, the candles still burning, all the trappings of the wedding that hadn't happened. It should have made her sad. Instead, she felt only relief. "Ready?" Darian asked. Eliza gathered her ruined silk skirts, kicked off the impractical satin shoes, and let Darian help her onto the horse. "Ready," she said. And they rode away from everything she'd ever known, toward everything she'd never dared to hope for. The first drops of rain hit as they cleared the estate boundaries. Within minutes, the sky opened up completely, turning the road into a muddy river and soaking them both to the bone. Eliza pressed against Darian's back, her ruined wedding dress clinging to her skin, her hair streaming water. She should have been miserable. Instead, she felt exhilarated. "There's an inn about 5 miles ahead," Darian shouted over the wind. "We'll stop there for the night." 5 miles felt like 50 in the downpour. By the time they reached the Copper Bell Inn, Eliza's fingers were numb and her teeth were chattering. The place was small, squat, built more for function than beauty. Nothing like the elegant establishments her family frequented. Perfect. Darian helped her down from the horse, his hand steadying her when she stumbled on numb feet. They half ran through the rain to the entrance, water streaming off them both. The innkeeper was a broad woman with suspicious eyes that swept over them, taking in the expensive wedding dress, the barefoot bride, the man who clearly wasn't the groom. Her expression said she'd seen everything and approved of none of it. "Room for the night," Darian said, pulling coins from his pocket. "And food, if you have it." The woman's eyes lingered on Eliza. "Married, are you?" "That's not your concern," Darian said evenly. "It is if you're wanting a room in my establishment. I run a respectable house." "We're married," Eliza heard herself say. The lie came easily, surprising her. "Just today, actually. The ceremony was shorter than expected." The innkeeper's gaze sharpened, clearly not buying it, but the coins in Darian's hand were real enough. "Room's upstairs, second door. Hot water costs extra." "We'll take it," Darian said. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with a single narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that rattled in the wind. But it was dry and private, and right now that was enough. Eliza stood dripping on the rough wooden floor, suddenly acutely aware that she was alone with Darian in a bedroom for the first time. All those chaperoned meetings, those careful conversations in the cottage with the door propped open, all that propriety felt like a lifetime ago. "I'll sleep on the floor," Darian said quickly, reading her tension. "You take the bed." "That's ridiculous. You'll freeze." "I've slept in worse conditions." A knock interrupted them. A young girl brought in a basin of hot water, eyeing them with unconcealed curiosity before scurrying away. Eliza waited until the door closed, then peeled off the soaking wedding dress with shaking fingers. It fell to the floor in a sodden heap of ruined silk, and she felt no regret at all. Underneath, her chemise was nearly as wet. Darian turned his back, staring determinedly at the wall. "There should be a blanket in the trunk. You can wrap yourself in that." She found the blanket, rough wool but warm, and cocooned herself in it, her wet undergarments still clinging uncomfortably. "You can turn around now." He did, and his eyes went soft at the sight of her wrapped in the blanket, hair hanging in wet ropes, shivering despite the warmth. "We should have planned this better." "When exactly?" "Between the wedding implosion and your dramatic declaration." That almost got a smile from him. He stripped off his own coat, wrung it out over the basin. His shirt was plastered to his skin, revealing the lean muscle beneath. Eliza looked away, suddenly flustered. What happens now? She asked. Tomorrow, I mean, after we leave here. We keep riding north, stay ahead of anyone who might be following. Would they follow? Your father? Maybe. Probably not, though. He strikes me as the type who'd rather cut his losses than chase after what he considers damaged goods. The words stung even though they were true. So we just run? For now, until the scandal dies down, until people forget or find something more interesting to gossip about. He sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion clear in the slump of his shoulders. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you imagined. What I imagined was spending tonight in a bridal suite at Ashford Hall, making polite conversation with a man I didn't love while pretending to be happy. So actually, this is better. Shivering in a room the size of a cupboard, wearing a blanket because you have no other clothes? Better? Yes, because I chose it. The food arrived. Bread, cheese, some kind of stew that was more broth than substance. They ate in silence, passing the single bowl back and forth. It should have been awkward, but instead it felt oddly intimate, comfortable even. Tell me about the cottage, Eliza said. What's it really like? Darian set down the bowl. Honest answer? Always. It's isolated. The nearest neighbor is half a mile away. The village is small, maybe 200 people. Most of them fishermen or farmers. They're good people, but they don't ask questions, which is why I went there in the first place. Running from your family? Running from expectations. From the person they wanted me to be. He looked at her directly. I was supposed to marry someone once, years ago. A woman from another aristocratic family. Very suitable, very proper. My father arranged everything. Eliza's stomach tightened. What happened? I met her. Spent time with her. Realized we had nothing in common except family pressure. So I broke it off. Father never forgave me. Said I was selfish, ungrateful, throwing away opportunities. He was right about some of it. I did throw it away, but I couldn't. He stopped, struggling with the words. I couldn't pretend for the rest of my life. I'd rather have nothing authentic than everything fake. Is that why you came back to the wedding? I came back because Marcus wrote to me, told me about the engagement, about you, asked if I'd attend as a gesture of family unity. I almost didn't, but then I thought, maybe I could handle it. See him get married, wish him well, leave, keep the guilt at bay. Guilt? For abandoning him. Marcus always tried to bridge the gap between me and father, tried to keep the family together. I left him to handle that alone. It wasn't your job to sacrifice yourself for family peace. Wasn't it? Darian's voice turned bitter. That's what families do, isn't it? Sacrifice, compromise. Do what's expected for the greater good. Or we can choose differently. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. When I saw you in that field, hurt and angry, and more real than anyone I'd met in years, I knew I was in trouble. I knew I should walk away, get you home, forget I ever met you. But I couldn't. I'm glad you couldn't. Are you? Even now? Even knowing what it cost? Eliza pulled the blanket tighter. Ask me again in a month, when we're actually living in that cottage with the leaking roof. When the reality of this choice has set in, then I'll tell you if I regret it. Fair enough. The rain continued through the night. Darian kept his word and slept on the floor despite Eliza's protests. She lay awake for hours, listening to his breathing, trying to process everything that had happened. Less than 12 hours ago, she'd been getting dressed for her wedding. Now she was a social outcast, cut off from her family, sleeping in a roadside inn with a man she barely knew but somehow trusted completely. The absurdity of it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt alive. Morning brought weak sunshine and the innkeeper's suspicious glare. They left quickly, Eliza still wearing the blanket over her chemise since the wedding dress was unsalvageable. The innkeeper sold her a rough cotton dress meant for a servant, too big in places, too tight in others, but dry and practical. You look like a different person, Darian observed as they mounted the horse again. Good. I want to be a different person. They rode north through countryside that grew progressively wilder and less cultivated. Neat estates gave way to rough farmland, which gave way to open moors dotted with sheep. The people they passed looked at them with curiosity but not recognition. This far from the social centers, the scandal of a ruined wedding probably wouldn't reach for weeks, if ever. 3 days of travel brought them to the coast. Eliza smelled the salt air before she saw the water, and when the ocean finally appeared, vast and gray and churning, she felt something loosen in her chest. This was freedom. This was what she'd chosen. The cottage sat on a cliff overlooking the water, exactly as Darian had described. Stone walls, a roof that clearly needed work, windows that rattled in the wind. Inside was sparse: a table, 2 chairs, a bed frame with a thin mattress, a fireplace that seemed to be the only source of heat. No luxury, no comfort, just shelter. "Home," Darian said, and there was uncertainty in his voice. "Such as it is." Eliza walked through both rooms slowly, taking inventory. Bare shelves, dusty floor, cobwebs in the corners. It would need cleaning, organizing, making livable, but the bones were solid. The view was stunning, and most importantly, it was theirs. "I love it," she said. "You're lying." "I'm not. It's perfect." Over the next week, they fell into an exhausting routine. Darian showed her how to build a fire that wouldn't smoke them out, how to cook simple meals on the hearth, how to patch the worst holes in the roof using tar and canvas. Eliza learned quickly, driven by necessity and stubborn pride. She'd never done manual labor in her life, and every task left her hands blistered and her back aching. But she'd also never felt more satisfied. The village, when they visited, was exactly as Darian had described: small, insular, the fishmonger, the baker, the woman who ran the general store. They all knew Darian, greeted him with cautious warmth. They eyed Eliza with frank curiosity, but asked no prying questions. "Wife?" Darian introduced her, and Eliza didn't correct him. It was easier than explaining the truth. But rumors spread anyway. By the second week, Eliza noticed the whispers when they walked past, the way conversation stopped when she entered shops, the looks that ranged from pitying to scandalized. "They know something," she told Darian one evening as they ate dinner by firelight. "About us. About the wedding. Probably news travels." "Does it bother you?" "Does it bother you?" Eliza considered. "No, let them talk. We're not hurting anyone." But she was wrong about that. The letter arrived on a gray morning 3 weeks after they'd settled into the cottage. A boy from the village delivered it, looking nervous, and rode away without waiting for a response. Eliza recognized the handwriting immediately. Emily. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. "Eliza, I don't know if you'll even receive this. I don't know if you want to hear from me. But I have to write. I have to tell you what's happening here. Father is destroying everything trying to get revenge for what you did. He's called in every favor, pressured every contact, turned the entire county against the Ashfords. Lord Ashford's business partnerships are falling apart. Marcus is being shunned at his club. Even Mother is suffering. Half her friends won't speak to her. But that's not the worst part. Father found out where you are. Don't ask me how. I think he hired someone to track you, and he's telling everyone you were kidnapped, that Darian took you against your will, that you're being held in some remote location, unable to escape. People believe him, Eliza. They believe you're a victim, and Father is building a case to have Darian arrested for abduction. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. I wanted to warn you. Please be careful. Emily. The letter fell from Eliza's hands. Darian picked it up, read it quickly, his face going hard. Abduction, he said flatly. Of course, the perfect way to salvage her reputation and destroy me at the same time. He can't actually do that. I'll testify. I'll tell everyone the truth. Your word against your father's, against the entire social establishment? Eliza, they want to believe his version. The kidnapped daughter is so much more palatable than the rebellious one who chose scandal over safety. So what do? We run, now, before he can send anyone to arrest me. No. The word came out harder than she intended. No more running. I'm done hiding. This isn't about pride. It's exactly about pride. And truth. And not letting him win. Eliza paced the small cottage, her mind racing. If we run, we prove his story. Look, there they go, fleeing like criminals. But if we stay, if we face this directly, they'll arrest me, possibly hang me, depending on how far your father pushes it. The casual way he said it made Eliza's blood run cold. They wouldn't. They would. For kidnapping a woman of quality, for ruining her reputation and her family's standing. Eliza, in their eyes, I've committed a crime. The fact that you came willingly doesn't matter if everyone believes otherwise. Then we make them believe the truth. How? She stopped pacing. An idea was forming, reckless and probably stupid, but it was all she had. We go back. To the city. We face them directly. I stand in front of everyone, my family, the Ashfords, all of society, and I tell them exactly what happened. That's insane. Maybe, but it's the only way to stop this. If I stay hidden, Father controls the narrative. But if I show up, speak for myself, refuse to be the victim he's made me into, he loses that power. Darian was already shaking his head. You're underestimating how dangerous this is. Your father has spent weeks building this story. He has allies, influence, money. We have nothing. We have the truth. Truth doesn't matter when enough people want to believe the lie. Then we make it matter. Eliza grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. I am not letting you take the fall for my choices, and I am not letting him turn me into some helpless victim who needed rescuing from her own decisions. If this goes wrong, then we'll deal with it, together. But I won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when he'll send someone to drag you away. I won't live like that. Darian studied her face for a long moment. She could see him weighing options, calculating risks, trying to find a safer path. But finally, he nodded. All right, we go back. But we do this carefully. We need witnesses, documentation, proof that you came willingly. Marcus will testify. He stopped the wedding himself. Your father will say Marcus was coerced or confused. We need more than that. What about the vicar? He saw everything. Maybe, if he's willing to risk your father's wrath. They spent the next 2 days planning. Darian wrote to Marcus, explaining the situation, asking for his help. Eliza drafted her own letter to the vicar, appealing to his conscience, reminding him of what he'd witnessed. And both of them prepared for the very real possibility that this plan would fail spectacularly and end with Darian in chains. The response from Marcus came faster than expected. He would help. He'd already been fighting their father's narrative, trying to tell anyone who'd listen that the wedding had been stopped consensually. But few believed him. Too many people preferred the drama of the kidnapping story. The vicar's response was more cautious. He would testify to what he saw, but he wouldn't go against Lord Whitmore directly. It was something, at least. They left the cottage on a cold morning, the ocean gray and churning behind them. Eliza looked back once, wondering if she'd ever see it again. The little stone house that had represented freedom now felt like a beautiful dream she was waking from too soon. The journey south felt different from the journey north. Heavier, more fraught with consequence. They stopped at the same inn where they'd spent that first night, but this time the innkeeper's suspicion felt justified. They were walking into danger with their eyes open. 2 days from the city, they were ambushed. The men came out of the trees without warning, 4 of them, well-dressed, clearly hired for this purpose. Darian pulled his horse up short, positioning himself between Eliza and the threat. Darian Blackwood? The leader was a tall man with a scarred face and the bearing of someone who'd done this kind of work before. You're wanted for questioning regarding the abduction of Eliza Whitmore. There was no abduction, Eliza said, but the man ignored her. You'll come with us. Peacefully, preferably. And if I refuse? Then we'll take you by force. Your choice. Darian's hand moved slowly toward his saddlebag. Eliza knew he kept a knife there, but against 4 armed men, it would be suicide to fight. Don't, she said quietly. Please don't. He looked at her, his face a battlefield of conflicting instincts. Every part of him wanted to fight, to run, to do anything except surrender, but he also knew the reality of their situation. I'll go, he said. But she comes with me, as a witness. That's not how this works. Those are my terms. Either we both come peacefully, and you get your prisoner without a fight, or you try to take me by force and someone gets hurt. Maybe multiple someones. Is that what you were paid for? The scarred man considered this. Finally, he nodded. Both of you. But any trouble and you'll regret it. They were escorted south like criminals, the 4 men surrounding them at all times. At night, they camped under the stars. Eliza and Darian kept separated, guards watching constantly. It was humiliating and terrifying, but Eliza forced herself to stay calm. They'd expected something like this. They had a plan. The city appeared on the horizon like a threat. Gray buildings, church spires, the familiar architecture of Eliza's childhood now feeling alien and hostile. As they rode through the streets, people stopped to stare. Word had spread fast. The kidnapped bride being brought home. The villain in custody. The drama everyone had been gossiping about for weeks was finally reaching its climax. They were taken directly to the magistrate's house, an imposing building in the merchant district. Lord Whitmore was already there, along with Lady Whitmore, and several other men Eliza recognized as her father's business associates and political allies. The room was set up like a trial, with chairs arranged for witnesses and a large desk at the front where the magistrate sat looking grim. Darian was pulled from his horse roughly. Eliza tried to stay with him, but hands grabbed her arms, pulling her toward her parents. "Eliza, thank heaven!" Her mother's voice was pure theater. "We were so worried. Did he hurt you?" "He didn't hurt me. Let me go." "You're safe now, darling. You're home." "I said, let me go." Eliza wrenched her arm free, stepping away from her mother's reaching hands. "I'm not a child and I'm not a victim. Stop treating me like both." The magistrate, an older man with the look of someone who'd presided over too many unpleasant cases, cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore, your father has made serious accusations against this man. Accusations of abduction, coercion, and corruption of a minor. I'm 23, not a minor. Corruption of a young woman of quality," he continued, unfazed. "Before we proceed, I need to establish the facts. Did this man take you from your wedding by force?" "No." "Did he threaten you in any way?" "No." "Did he make promises or use manipulation to convince you to leave your family?" "He told me the truth. About myself, about my life, about what I really wanted. That's not manipulation. That's honesty." Her father stepped forward. "She's been brainwashed. Can't you see? She doesn't even realize what he's done to her." "I realize perfectly well what's been done to me," Eliza said coldly. "You arranged a marriage I didn't want. You ignored my feelings for years. You treated me like property to be traded. And now that I've chosen differently, you're trying to rewrite the story to make yourself the victim. How dare you, Bas? No. How dare you?" Eliza turned to face the entire room. "I left that wedding willingly. I chose Darian. I chose a different life. That's not a crime. That's not abduction. That's just a daughter finally making her own decisions." "Decisions that have destroyed this family's reputation," her mother hissed. "Your reputation was built on lies and appearances. I'm done maintaining it." The magistrate looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with this family drama playing out in his house. "Miss Whitmore, are you saying you went with Mr. Blackwood of your own free will? That you were not coerced or forced in any way?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." "She's confused," Lord Whitmore insisted. "She's been isolated for weeks, fed lies, turned against her own family." The door burst open. Marcus Ashford strode in, followed by the vicar and, surprisingly, Lady Ashford. "She's not confused," Marcus said. "I was there. I stopped the wedding myself because I couldn't go through with a marriage based on lies, and I watched Eliza make her own choice to leave with my brother." "You were manipulated as well," Lord Whitmore said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I wasn't manipulated. I was relieved." Marcus turned to the magistrate. "Sir, I stopped my own wedding. I told everyone the marriage was wrong. My brother didn't seduce anyone or kidnap anyone. He simply offered an alternative to a life neither Eliza nor I truly wanted." The vicar stepped forward nervously. "I must concur. I witnessed the entire event. Miss Whitmore made her choice freely. Mr. Blackwood did not force her." Lord Whitmore's face was turning purple. "You're all lying. You're protecting him because we're telling the truth," Lady Ashford said quietly. Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Edmund, enough. Your daughter is standing here telling you she chose to leave. My son is confirming it. The vicar witnessed it. At what point do you accept that she made her own decision? She's my daughter. And she's also a woman with her own mind, something you never wanted to acknowledge. The magistrate looked around the room, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Based on the testimony I've heard, I'm finding no evidence of abduction or coercion. Miss Whitmore appears to have left of her own accord. This is outrageous. The case is dismissed. The magistrate stood, making it clear the discussion was over. Mr. Blackwood, you're free to go. Miss Whitmore, you're free to make your own choices, apparently. Darian was released immediately. He crossed to Eliza, and she grabbed his hand like a lifeline. You can't do this, Lord Whitmore said, but his voice had gone hollow. She's ruined. They both are. They'll be social outcasts. Then let us be outcasts, Eliza said. I'd rather be ruined and free than respected and trapped. Her mother made a sound like a wounded animal. After everything we've done for you, you did it for yourselves, for your position, your alliances, your legacy. Never for me. Eliza, please, I'm done, Mother. I'm done trying to be what you want. I'm done apologizing for wanting something different. I'm just done. She turned and walked toward the door, Darian beside her. Marcus followed, as did Lady Ashford. The vicar nodded respectfully and slipped away. And Lord and Lady Whitmore stood frozen in the magistrate's house, watching their daughter walk out of their lives. Outside, the street was crowded with onlookers who'd gathered to watch the drama. Whispers followed them as they emerged. The kidnapped bride who wasn't kidnapped, the villain who wasn't a villain, the scandal that had consumed the social season. What now? Marcus asked. Now we go home, Darian said. Back to the cottage. Back to our life. They'll never accept you in society, Lady Ashford warned. Either of you. Good, Eliza said. Society can have its rules and its expectations. We'll have something better. They were halfway to the stables when the shot rang out. The sound echoed off the buildings, sharp and unmistakable. Darian staggered, his hand going to his shoulder where blood was already spreading across his shirt. Eliza screamed. People scattered, shouting. And in the chaos, she saw him. Her father, standing in an alley with a pistol still smoking in his hand, his face twisted with rage and grief and something close to madness. If I can't have you back, he said, his voice carrying over the panic, then he can't have you at all. Then he was running, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could react. Darian collapsed. Eliza caught him, her hands immediately red with his blood, her mind blank with terror. Help! She screamed. Someone help us! Marcus was there, supporting Darian's weight. Lady Ashford was shouting for a doctor. The crowd pressed in, curious and horrified, and Darian looked up at Eliza with glazed eyes and said, Still think this was the right choice? She wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. Instead, she pressed her hands harder against his wound and said, Ask me again when you're not bleeding. The doctor's hands were steady, but his face told a different story. He worked by candlelight in a room above the apothecary shop, extracting the bullet from Darian's shoulder while Eliza held him down and Marcus kept watch at the door. Blood soaked through the linens faster than they could replace them. He's lost a lot, the doctor muttered, more to himself than anyone else. If infection sets in, it won't, Eliza said, though she had no authority to make that promise. It can't. Darian's eyes were closed, his face gray. He'd passed out halfway through the procedure, which was probably a mercy. Every muscle in his body had gone rigid with pain before unconsciousness took him. Done. The doctor stepped back, wiping his hands on a cloth already stained red. The bullet's out. Wound as clean as I can make it. Now it's up to him. What can I do? Keep the bandages fresh. Watch for fever. If the wound starts to smell or the skin around it turns dark, send for me immediately. He paused, looking at her directly. And pray. That's all any of us can do now. Eliza didn't pray. She sat beside Darian's bed and willed him to live through sheer force of stubbornness, as if she could anchor him to the world by refusing to let go of his hand. Marcus brought news throughout the night. The magistrate had issued a warrant for Lord Whitmore's arrest. Attempted murder committed in full view of dozens of witnesses. No amount of social standing could excuse that. He'd fled the city, no one knew where. Lady Whitmore had collapsed and was under a physician's care. The scandal had exploded beyond anything the previous weeks had generated. "They're saying your father went mad," Marcus reported, slumping in a chair near Dawn. "That the shame of the broken engagement drove him to violence." "That's not why he did it," Eliza said quietly. Her voice was hoarse from hours of silence. "He did it because I defied him, because I chose something he couldn't control. That's worse, isn't it? Madness we can forgive, deliberate violence out of wounded pride. Makes him a monster." "Yes." Darian's fever started the second day. His skin burned under Eliza's touch, and he thrashed in his sleep, mumbling words she couldn't understand. The doctor came twice daily, changing bandages, administering tinctures, looking progressively more grim. "The infection's spreading," he said on the third day. "I've done what I can, but his body needs to fight this on its own." "He will," Eliza said. "Miss Whitmore, he will." She refused to leave his side except when absolutely necessary. Marcus brought food she didn't eat. Lady Ashford sent clean linens and offered to sit with her, but Eliza sent her away. This felt like penance somehow, like if she could just keep Darian alive through sheer determination, she could prove that her choice had been worth it, that they both hadn't been destroyed for nothing. On the fourth night, his fever broke. Eliza woke from an uncomfortable doze in the chair to find him looking at her with clear eyes. "You're still here," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Where else would I be?" "Anywhere sensible. Somewhere your father can't shoot people." Despite everything, she laughed. It came out more like a sob. "He's gone. Fled the city. There's a warrant out for his arrest." "Good." Darian tried to sit up, winced, and gave up on the attempt. "What about you? Are you all right?" "Am I—" She stared at him. "You were shot. You nearly died. You've been unconscious for 4 days, and you're asking if I'm all right?" "Yes." The simplicity of it broke something inside her. Eliza put her head down on the edge of his bed and cried, really cried, for the first time since the wedding. All the fear and anger and guilt came pouring out in ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Darian's hand found her hair, stroking it gently. "Hey, I'm all right. We're all right." "We're not." "Nothing's all right. My father tried to murder you. My family's destroyed. We can't go back to the cottage because he knows where it is, and we can't stay here because we're broke, homeless, and wanted by half the aristocracy?" She lifted her head, wiping her eyes. "I was going to say socially ruined, but your version works too." "Well," he managed a weak smile, "at least we're consistent." Over the next week, as Darian slowly regained his strength, the full scope of the scandal became clear. Lord Whitmore had indeed fled, leaving behind a wife on the verge of nervous collapse and a daughter whose name was on everyone's lips. Some called Eliza brave, others called her foolish. Most just called her the season's most entertaining disaster. But something unexpected happened. Other young women started coming forward. The first was a girl named Catherine Morrison, barely 18, who appeared at the apothecary shop one morning asking to speak with Eliza. She was trembling, clearly terrified but determined. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for what you did at the wedding." Eliza didn't understand. "Thank me?" "My parents are arranging a marriage to a man 3 times my age who I've met exactly twice. I've been trying to tell them I don't want it, but they won't listen. They say it's my duty, that my feelings don't matter." Catherine's voice shook. "But you showed all of us, that we can say no, that we have a choice. I didn't mean to—" "I know, but you did it anyway. And now maybe I can too." She left before Eliza could respond. But she wasn't the last. Over the following days, more women came. Some angry at their situations, some grateful for permission to want something different, some just curious to meet the woman who'd caused such upheaval. And gradually, Eliza realized that the scandal she'd created had torn open a conversation that society had been desperately trying to keep closed. What did women want? What were they allowed to want? And who got to decide? Marcus brought news that several engagements had been quietly dissolved in the wake of the scandal. Parents who'd been forcing matches suddenly found their daughters less compliant. Young women who'd accepted their fates were now questioning them. "You've started something," he told Eliza. "I don't know if it's a revolution or just chaos, but it's definitely something. I didn't mean to start anything. I just wanted to live my own life. That's exactly why it matters." But not everyone was grateful. Mothers who'd spent years arranging advantageous marriages for their daughters were furious. Men who'd counted on compliant brides found themselves facing uncomfortable questions. And the social machinery that had run smoothly for generations suddenly had sand in its gears. Lady Hartwell, one of her mother's oldest friends, published a letter in the society papers calling Eliza a disgrace to womanhood, a corrupting influence who should be shunned by all decent people. Others rallied to her defense, calling her courageous. The argument spilled into drawing rooms and dinner parties across the city. Eliza read the letters and editorials with a strange detachment. They were arguing about her, but also not about her at all. She'd become a symbol, and symbols didn't get to control their own meaning. "You should write your own account," Marcus suggested one afternoon. He'd taken to visiting daily, bringing news and provisions, clearly enjoying his newfound role as family rebel. "Tell people what actually happened, in your own words." No one would publish it. "My friend edits a weekly paper, progressive politics, social reform, that sort of thing. He'd publish it." Eliza considered this. The idea of putting her story out there, unfiltered by scandal sheets and gossip, was both terrifying and appealing. What would I even say? The truth. Always the truth. She wrote it over 3 days, while Darian recovered enough to sit up and offer commentary. It wasn't eloquent or particularly literary, just a straightforward account of what had happened and why she'd made the choices she had. She didn't apologize, didn't try to justify herself to her parents or society, just explained. "I was raised to be obedient," she wrote, "to accept what I was told, to marry who I was told to marry, to be grateful for a life that was decided for me before I was old enough to have opinions about it. I tried. I really did try to be what everyone wanted. But in the end, I had to ask myself, whose life am I living? And if it's mine, don't I get a say in how it goes?" The piece ran in the Saturday edition of the Progressive Weekly. Eliza braced for backlash. Instead, she got letters, dozens of them. Women from across the country writing to share their own stories of arranged marriages, forced choices, lives lived for everyone except themselves. Some had found happiness anyway. Others were miserable but trapped. A few had made their own escapes and wanted to share solidarity. "You've become a figurehead," Darian observed. He was up and moving now, still weak but recovering. "For women who want something different." "I don't want to be a figurehead. I just want to live quietly." Too late for that. He was right. The attention was overwhelming, invasive, impossible to escape. But it also brought unexpected opportunities. A woman named Margaret Thornton appeared at the apothecary one morning. She was older, well-dressed, but not aristocratic, with the bearing of someone used to making her own decisions. "Miss Whitmore, I run a school for young women, teaching practical skills, mathematics, sciences, languages, trades, things that let them support themselves if needed." She got straight to the point. "I'd like to offer you a position, teaching literature and composition." Eliza stared. "I'm not qualified to teach." "You read, don't you? Write? Think critically?" "Well, yes, but..." "Then you're qualified. More importantly, you understand what these girls are fighting against. The pressure to be decorative instead of useful. The assumption that their minds don't matter." Margaret smiled. "Besides, half my students are coming because they heard you'd be teaching. Your notoriety has its advantages." The offer was genuine. A small salary, room and board if needed, the chance to do something meaningful. Eliza looked at Darian, who nodded encouragingly. "When would I start?" she asked. The school was in the northern quarter of the city, housed in a converted warehouse that Margaret had purchased with her own money after her husband died and left her independently wealthy. 20 students currently, ranging from 14 to 25, all from families that couldn't afford or wouldn't provide traditional education. "Some are here because they want to be," Margaret explained on Eliza's first day. "Others because their families sent them as punishment for being difficult. Either way, They need skills that will let them survive outside marriage. The classroom was nothing like Eliza's own education had been. No embroidery or dancing, no lessons on managing servants or hosting dinner parties. Instead, the students learned accounting, basic law, science, philosophy. Things that made them employable, independent, dangerous. Eliza's first class was literature, and she'd prepared a lesson on poetry. But standing before 20 young women, some curious, some skeptical, all clearly wondering if she was a hero or a cautionary tale, she abandoned the plan. "I'm not here to teach you poetry," she said. "At least not today. Today I want to talk about what happened at my wedding and what it means." The room went silent. This was what they'd all wanted to hear. I was supposed to marry a good man from a good family. The marriage would have benefited everyone except possibly me and the groom. We went along with it because that's what we were taught to do. Obey, comply, make everyone else happy. She paused. And then, standing at that altar, I realized I had a choice. Maybe for the first time in my life, I could actually choose. One of the younger girls raised her hand tentatively. "But weren't you scared of what people would say?" "Terrified. I'm still terrified most days. But I was more scared of spending my whole life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose differently." "My mother says you ruined yourself," another student said. She didn't sound accusatory, just curious, that no decent man will marry you now. She's probably right. And you know what? I don't care. Because I'd rather be ruined and free than respectable and trapped. The discussion that followed was chaotic, passionate, exactly what Margaret had hoped for. The girls argued about duty versus desire, security versus freedom, what they owed their families versus what they owed themselves. There were no easy answers, but at least they were asking the questions. After class, a quiet girl named Sarah approached Eliza. "My father wants me to marry his business partner. He's 47. I'm 19. "What do you want?" "I want to study medicine, to be a physician if they'd let me. But father says that's impossible, that I should be grateful for a good match." Eliza thought of her own father, of the life he'd tried to force her into. It's not impossible. Difficult, yes, but not impossible, especially if you're willing to fight for it. "Like you did?" "Like I'm still doing. The fight doesn't end just because you make one brave choice. You have to keep making them." Word of Eliza's teaching spread. More students enrolled. More letters arrived from women across the country. The school expanded, and gradually, against all odds and expectations, Eliza found herself building something that mattered. But the consequences of her father's violence still loomed. The warrant remained active, but Lord Whitmore had vanished completely. Some said he'd fled to the continent. Others claimed he was hiding with distant relatives in Scotland. Lady Whitmore refused to help with the search, broken by her husband's actions and her daughter's choices in equal measure. Emily wrote again, her letter filled with pain and confusion. "Mother barely leaves her room. She won't see anyone, won't eat properly, just sits there staring at nothing. The house feels like a tomb. Everyone blames you for destroying the family, but I know it was father who did that. He's the one who pulled the trigger. He's the one who ran. I don't know what to feel anymore. I was angry at you for leaving, for causing such scandal, but now I think maybe you were right. Maybe we were all trapped and you were the only one brave enough to break free. I wish I knew how to be that brave." Eliza wrote back immediately, inviting her sister to visit, to see the school, to talk honestly for the first time in their lives. She didn't know if Emily would come, but she had to try. 3 weeks after starting at the school, Eliza was teaching when a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with Margaret. Then the classroom door burst open. Lord Whitmore stood there, disheveled and wild-eyed, with a pistol in his hand. The students screamed. Eliza stepped in front of them instinctively, her heart hammering. "Father," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "put the gun down. You've destroyed everything." His voice was raw, broken. "Our family, our reputation, our future, all of it gone because you couldn't be obedient. You destroyed it yourself when you tried to murder Darian. I was trying to save you from yourself, from him, from this degradation." He gestured at the school, the students, everything Eliza had built. "Look at you, teaching in a warehouse like a common laborer. This is what your rebellion brought you." This is what my choice brought me, and I'm happy here. Happy? He laughed, the sound edging toward hysteria. You think you're happy, living in poverty, cut off from your family, reduced to this? Yes, I'm happier than I ever was in your house, following your rules, living your life. Behind her, she could hear the students breathing hard, terrified. Margaret was in the hallway. Eliza could hear her voice, probably trying to get help, but help wouldn't arrive in time if her father decided to use that gun. I came to give you one last chance, he said. Come home. Apologize publicly. Denounce him. We can rebuild. No. Eliza, I said no. I'm not coming home. I'm not apologizing for choosing my own life. And I'm definitely not denouncing the man I love to save your reputation. His hand tightened on the pistol. For a horrible moment, Eliza thought he would actually do it. Shoot her here in front of 24 witnesses and complete his transformation into the monster he'd been becoming all along. But then Darian appeared in the doorway behind her father. His shoulder was still bandaged, his movements careful, but he was there. And he wasn't alone. Marcus was with him, along with several men Eliza didn't recognize. Constables, she realized. The law had finally caught up. Edmund Whitmore, one of the constables said. You're under arrest for attempted murder. Her father turned, saw the trap, and something in him collapsed. The gun fell from his hand, clattering on the wooden floor. He didn't resist as they took him into custody, didn't fight or argue, just went quietly, looking suddenly old and broken. He caught Eliza's eyes once as they led him away. She expected rage or hate or even grief. Instead, she saw something worse, incomprehension. He genuinely didn't understand what he'd done wrong. In his mind, he'd been protecting his family, maintaining order, doing what was necessary. He'd never understand that the order he'd been protecting was the problem. After they took him away, the classroom erupted into chaos. Students crying, talking over each other, some wanting to leave, and others refusing to abandon their lesson. Margaret restored order eventually, sent everyone home early, closed the school for the day. Eliza sat in the empty classroom with Darian and Marcus, trying to process what had just happened. It's over, Marcus said. He'll stand trial. Go to prison, probably. The scandal will take years to fade, but at least it's over. Is it? Eliza looked at the door where her father had stood, broken and dangerous. He's my father. Part of me still loves him, Darian finished quietly. Pities him, maybe. Or grieves for who he could have been if he'd been different. If he'd seen me as a person instead of property. That's not your burden to carry, Marcus said gently. Isn't it? He's my father. His choices, his violence, his downfall. I played a part in all of it. No. Darian's voice was firm. You made your own choices. He made his. You're not responsible for his inability to accept that. That evening, back at the small apartment Eliza and Darian had rented near the school, they sat by the window watching the city lights flicker to life. The trial would start soon. Her father's fate would be decided by strangers, and Eliza would have to testify, to stand in front of everyone and tell her story one more time. I keep thinking about what he said, she admitted, about me being reduced to this. Teaching in a warehouse, living in a tiny apartment, no servants, no status, no comfort. Do you regret it? She thought about it honestly. The past months had been brutal, physically exhausting, emotionally draining, financially precarious. Nothing like the comfortable life she'd been raised for. And yet, no, I don't regret it. This is harder, but it's mine. The school is mine. The choices are mine. Even the struggles are mine. And that matters more than any comfort I had before. Good. Because I'd hate to think you went through all this just to end up miserable. Are you miserable? Darian considered. I got shot defending you, lost any remaining connection to my family, and I'm living in a 2-room apartment above a bakery with a woman who terrifies half the aristocracy. So no, not miserable at all. 3 days later, the trial began. Lord Whitmore pleaded guilty. His lawyer had apparently convinced him that fighting the charges would only make things worse. The attempted murder had been witnessed by dozens of people. The flight afterward had established consciousness of guilt. His only hope for leniency was remorse. But he showed no remorse. Not really. Standing before the judge, he spoke of family honor, social order, the sacred duties of fathers. He'd been trying to save his daughter from corruption, he claimed, to restore balance to a world gone mad. The judge was unmoved, 7 years in prison. Lady Whitmore attended the sentencing, her face hidden behind a heavy veil. She left without speaking to anyone, supported by servants. Emily was there too, sitting in the back, and afterwards she found Eliza outside the courthouse. "I'm leaving Mother," she said without preamble. "She'll have the house, her friends, whatever money's left, but I can't stay there anymore." "Where will you go?" Emily's smile was shaky but determined. "I was hoping you might know of a school that teaches practical skills to difficult women." Eliza pulled her sister into a hug, feeling the last piece of her old life finally letting go. "I might know a place." That night, the city papers ran stories about the trial, about the fallen lord and his rebellious daughter, about the scandal that had consumed the season. But there was something different in the tone now. Less mockery, more thoughtfulness. Several editorials praised Eliza's courage. Others called for reforms in how marriages were arranged, how women were treated, how choices were made. The conversation had shifted, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Margaret found Eliza the next morning with unexpected news. "We've had 17 new enrollment requests since the trial. Women from all over wanting to attend the school. Some as young as 15, others well into their 30s. All of them inspired by what you did." "What I did was survive, barely. You did more than survive. You showed them there was a different way to live, and now they want to learn how." The school expanded again. They took over the building next door, hired 2 more teachers, developed new courses. And Eliza, who'd been trained for nothing except decorative uselessness, found herself building something that mattered more than any drawing room conversation or social connection ever had. But the biggest surprise came from Lady Ashford. She appeared at the school one afternoon, dressed simply and alone. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about what you said, about duty and choice and living for everyone except ourselves, and I realized I've spent 40 years doing exactly what you refused to do, living someone else's life, being who they expected, never asking what I wanted." "It's not too late," Eliza said. "Isn't it? I'm past 50. My choices are made." "Then make new ones." Lady Ashford smiled sadly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's terrifying and difficult, and most people will think you're mad. But it's possible, if you want it badly enough." 2 weeks later, Lady Ashford filed for legal separation from Lord Ashford. The scandal it caused almost rivaled Eliza's original wedding disaster. But she didn't back down, didn't apologize, just moved into a small house in the city and started, for the first time in her life, making her own decisions. Marcus visited regularly, still serving as a bridge between his fractured family and the new world Eliza and Darian were building. He'd taken a position at a reform-minded newspaper, writing about social issues and political change. His father had disowned him for it. "I should be more upset," he admitted one evening, "about father, about the inheritance, all of it. But mostly I just feel relieved, like I can finally breathe." "I know that feeling," Eliza said. 6 months after the trial, Eliza and Darian stood in front of a small gathering and actually got married. Not the elaborate society wedding that had been planned, just a simple ceremony with Margaret, Marcus, Lady Ashford, Emily, and a handful of students as witnesses. The vicar who performed it was the same one from the original disaster, who'd apparently decided they'd suffered enough without his judgment. "Do you, Eliza Whitmore, take this man?" "I do," she said before he could finish. "Absolutely. Yes." Darian laughed. "Eager. Impatient. There's a difference." They held the reception at the school, with food prepared by students who'd learned cooking as a practical skill and decorations made from whatever they could scavenge. It wasn't elegant or sophisticated, but it was real and joyful and completely theirs. Late in the evening, as the party wound down, Darian pulled Eliza aside. "Any regrets yet?" he asked. She looked around at the unconventional gathering, her sister laughing with Margaret, Marcus in deep conversation with a student about workers' rights, Lady Ashford looking more alive than Eliza had ever seen her. This strange, imperfect family they'd built from the ruins of their old lives. "Not even one," she said. "Not even about the cottage? The quiet life by the sea we were supposed to have? We'll get there eventually, but right now, this matters more. And it did matter. The school grew, the conversation continued, and slowly, painfully slowly, but undeniably, things began to change. Not everywhere. Not for everyone, but enough that Eliza could see the impact, could trace the ripples spreading outward from that single moment of defiance at the altar. Other young women started questioning their arranged marriages. Some even broke them off. Schools like Margaret's opened in other cities. The conversation about women's education and independence moved from whispers to editorials to actual political discourse. It wasn't a revolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. And standing in the school she'd helped build, teaching students who'd come from all over to learn how to build their own futures, Eliza finally understood what freedom actually meant. Not the absence of struggle, not comfort or security or social approval, just the right to choose, and the courage to live with those choices, whatever they cost. 1 year after the wedding that never was, Eliza stood in front of Parliament. She hadn't planned to be there. The whole thing had started 3 months earlier when Margaret received a letter from a group of progressive politicians who'd been following the school's work. They wanted testimony about women's education for a proposed reform bill. Margaret had volunteered to speak, but then suggested Eliza join her. "You're the face of this movement whether you want to be or not," Margaret had said. "Your story opened doors. Now help us walk through them." So here she was, standing on the steps of one of the most powerful institutions in the country, wearing a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself, about to address a room full of men who thought women belonged in parlors, not politics. Darian squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. This is bigger than me now." Inside, the committee room was smaller than she'd expected. 12 men sat in a semicircle, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Margaret spoke first, laying out the practical case for women's education. The economic benefits, the social improvements, the waste of leaving half the population untrained and unemployed. Then it was Eliza's turn. She walked to the front of the room, her notes trembling slightly in her hands. For a moment, she was back at the altar, facing down her family and half the aristocracy, making a choice that would cost everything. This felt similar, terrifying and inevitable all at once. "Gentlemen," she began, "my name is Eliza Blackwood. Some of you may know me as the woman who abandoned her wedding and caused the scandal of last season." A few smirks. One outright sneer. She pressed on. "I'm not here to defend that choice or to ask for your approval of it. I'm here to talk about what happened after, about the dozens of women who wrote to me saying they'd been trapped in similar situations, about the girls who came to our school desperate for skills that would let them survive outside marriage, about the mothers who confessed they'd spent their whole lives living for everyone except themselves." One of the committee members, an older man with a severe face, interrupted. Mrs. Blackwood, your personal grievances are not the concern of this committee. We're here to discuss practical matters of education policy, not romantic notions of independence." "Then let me make it practical," Eliza said, her voice steadying. "Every woman sitting at home with nothing to do except embroider and gossip represents wasted potential, wasted intelligence, wasted labor. You want economic growth? Productive citizens? Social stability? Then stop treating half your population like decorative furniture and start treating them like human beings with minds worth training." The room went silent. She'd crossed a line, she knew. Been too direct, too confrontational. But she was tired of being diplomatic about this. "Furthermore," she continued before anyone could interrupt, "the current system creates desperation. Women with no skills, no education, no way to support themselves. They're forced into marriages they don't want, trapped in situations that make them miserable, and then blamed when they break under the pressure. You want stable families, happy marriages? Then give women actual choices. Let them marry because they want to, not because they have no other option." Another committee member, younger and less hostile, leaned forward. "And you believe education provides that choice?" "I know it does. I've seen it. Girls who came to us terrified and helpless, leaving with skills that let them work, earn money, support themselves. Some still choose marriage, but now it's a choice, not a prison sentence. And if they choose not to marry at all?" The severe man again. If this education of yours produces a generation of spinsters with dangerous ideas about independence, then you'll have a generation of productive, contributing citizens instead of desperate, unhappy wives. I fail to see the problem. The testimony went on for another hour. They asked about curriculum, funding, the school's success rates. They questioned Margaret's qualifications and Eliza's motives. They suggested, not subtly, that this was all a reaction to her own failed engagement rather than genuine social reform. But they listened. And at the end, several members thanked them for their time in ways that suggested actual consideration rather than dismissal. Walking out into the afternoon sun, Eliza felt drained but hopeful. "You were brilliant," Darian said. "Brutal, but brilliant." "I was too harsh. I should have been more diplomatic." "You were honest. That's better." Marcus was waiting outside, having watched from the public gallery. 3 of them were nodding by the end. Actually nodding. That's more than I expected. "Will it make a difference?" Eliza asked. "Maybe. Probably not immediately, but you planted seeds, and seeds grow." The seeds did grow, though not in ways Eliza expected. 2 weeks after the testimony, a wealthy widow named Eleanor Blackstone contacted the school. She wanted to fund an expansion, more teachers, better facilities, scholarship programs for girls who couldn't afford tuition. Her only condition was that they start teaching more than just practical skills. "Philosophy," she said when Eliza met with her. "Literature, politics, art, the things we're told women don't need. I want girls to learn how to think, not just how to survive." The expansion took 6 months. They acquired a proper building, an old mansion in the northern quarter that Eleanor purchased outright. They hired 4 new teachers, including a woman with a degree from a European university who'd been denied teaching positions everywhere else because of her gender. Enrollment doubled, then tripled, and the students who graduated started making noise. One became a clerk in a law office, the first woman they'd ever hired. Another started a small publishing house focused on women writers. A third ran for local council in her district and actually won. The ripples kept spreading. But success brought new problems. The more visible the school became, the more opposition it faced. Conservative papers ran editorials condemning it as a breeding ground for dangerous radicalism. Some parents forbade their daughters from attending. And there were protests, actual protests, outside the building from groups who believed women's education would destroy the family structure. "Maybe they're right," Eliza told Darian one night after a particularly hostile demonstration. "Maybe we are destroying something. The old order, the way things have always been." "Good," he said simply. "It needed destroying." The real test came when Parliament actually voted on the education reform bill. It was a modest proposal, just allowing girls to attend certain existing schools, nothing revolutionary. But it represented acknowledgement that women's education mattered at all, which was more than they'd had before. The night before the vote, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the city sounds, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The wedding, the scandal, her father's violence and imprisonment, the school, all of it converging on a single question. Did women deserve the same educational opportunities as men? The bill passed by 3 votes. 3 votes out of hundreds of members. The narrowest possible margin. But it passed. The celebration at the school that night was chaotic and joyful. Students dancing in the halls, teachers crying, Eleanor Blackstone opening bottles of champagne she'd apparently been saving for exactly this occasion. Even the usually reserved Margaret got drunk and gave a rambling speech about how they'd changed the world. Eliza stood apart from the chaos, watching. Darian found her on the back stairs, where she'd escaped for a moment of quiet. "Not celebrating?" he asked. "I am, just processing. A year ago I was getting ready to marry Marcus. Now I'm standing in a school I helped build, watching a celebration because Parliament acknowledged women have minds worth educating. It doesn't feel real." "It's real. You made it real." "We made it real. All of us. Margaret, the students, even Marcus and your mother. I was just the spark." "Sparks matter. Without them, nothing catches fire." She leaned against him, exhausted and exhilarated. "What happens now?" "Now we keep going. The bill is just the beginning. There's still so much to change." He was right. The bill opened some doors but left most still locked. Women still couldn't vote, couldn't own property in many cases. couldn't enter most professions. The law had shifted fractionally, but culture moved slower. Still, it was something. 6 months later, Emily graduated from the school's teaching program. She'd thrown herself into education with the fervor of someone making up for lost time, studying late into the night, asking endless questions, pushing herself harder than any other student. "I wasted so many years being ornamental," she told Eliza during one of their late-night study sessions. "I'm not wasting any more." At her graduation, she gave a speech that reduced half the audience to tears. "A year ago, I watched my sister walk away from everything she'd been taught to want. I thought she was insane. Throwing away security for uncertainty, comfort for struggle, approval for scandal. I couldn't understand it." Emily's voice strengthened. "But then, I watched what she built from that choice. I watched her create something that mattered more than any marriage alliance or social connection ever could. And I realized she wasn't throwing anything away. She was building something better." After the ceremony, their mother appeared. Eliza hadn't seen her since before the trial. Lady Catherine Whitmore looked older, grayer, but also somehow softer. The rigid hauteur had cracked, revealing something almost human underneath. "Mother," Emily said carefully, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see you graduate. Both of you, I suppose." She looked at Eliza with an expression that might have been regret. "I've spent the past year being very angry. At you, at Darian, at the entire situation, but mostly, I think, at myself." "Mother, let me finish. Your father is in prison because he couldn't accept that his daughter had her own will. I nearly ended up the same way. Not in prison, but trapped in my own bitterness and refusal to see what was right in front of me." "What changed?" Eliza asked. "I talked to Eleanor Blackstone. She told me about the school, about what you're doing here, and she asked me a question no one had ever asked before. What did I want? Not what was proper, not what was expected. What did I actually want?" Catherine's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't have an answer. 52 years old, and I've never asked myself that question." "It's not too late," Emily said softly. "Isn't it?" "No." Eliza stepped closer. "If Lady Ashford can leave her marriage and start over, if Emily can transform herself, if I can go from failed bride to school administrator, you can figure out what you want and go after it." Catherine looked between her daughters, and for the first time Eliza could remember, her mother actually seemed uncertain, vulnerable. "I don't know how," she admitted. "None of us did," Eliza said. "That's the point. You learn as you go." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. The wounds were too deep for that. But it was a beginning. Catherine started attending some of Margaret's lectures on women's literature. She made a substantial donation to the school, and slowly, carefully, she began building a relationship with her daughters that was based on something other than duty and disappointment. Meanwhile, the school kept growing. They opened a second location across the city, then a third in a neighboring town. Other cities started similar programs, inspired by their success. The resistance continued. There were still protests, still editorials condemning them, still parents who'd rather see their daughters uneducated than independent. But the momentum had shifted. 2 years after the wedding, Darian and Eliza finally made it back to the cottage by the sea. They'd sold it after her father's attack, too dangerous to return while he was free. But after his imprisonment, they'd quietly bought it back. It needed work. The roof had gotten worse, the windows were broken, everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. "Still love it?" Darian asked as they surveyed the damage. "More than ever. It's perfect." They spent a month fixing it up, doing the work themselves this time. Eliza learned to patch a roof properly, to replace window glass, to fix the fireplace so it didn't smoke. Her hands developed calluses and her back ached from the labor, but she'd never felt more satisfied. In the evenings, they walked along the cliff, watching the ocean crash against the rocks below. And Eliza thought about how far she'd come from that morning 2 years ago, when she'd put on a wedding dress and prepared to marry a man she didn't love. "Do you miss it?" Darian asked one evening. "The life you could have had, the comfort, the status, all of it?" "I miss some things," she admitted. "I miss Emily before all this happened. I miss the version of my parents who might have existed if they'd been different people. I miss the simplicity of having decisions made for me, even though I hated it at the time. But I don't miss who I was. That girl in the wedding dress, she was drowning and didn't even know it. Now at least I'm swimming. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, the struggle is proof I'm alive. They stayed at the cottage for 3 months, a sabbatical from the chaos of the school and the city. Eliza wrote during this time, not her story exactly, but a series of essays about women's education, independence, the right to choose. They were published in progressive papers and sparked fierce debates. Some called her work brilliant, others called it dangerous propaganda. She didn't particularly care which. The conversations were happening, and that was what mattered. When they returned to the city, the school had continued thriving under Margaret's leadership. But there was something new waiting for them: a proposal. Several wealthy women, inspired by the school's success, wanted to fund a national network. Schools in every major city, standardized curriculum, teacher training programs, the works. It would require Eliza and Margaret to travel, to speak publicly, to essentially become the face of a movement neither of them had intended to start. "It's too much," Eliza said to Darian after reading the proposal. "We're barely managing what we have. Expanding nationally? That's insane. You said that about teaching, about testifying before Parliament, about all of it." And I was right. It was insane. But you did it anyway. She looked at the proposal again. The scope was staggering: 30 schools in 5 years, hundreds of teachers, thousands of students, a complete transformation of how women's education worked in the country. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. "When do we start?" she asked. The next 5 years were a blur of exhausting, exhilarating work. Eliza and Margaret traveled constantly, opening schools, training teachers, fighting opposition in every city they visited. Some places welcomed them. Others physically barred them from entering certain districts, but they persisted. And slowly, painfully slowly, the network grew. Marcus joined them full-time, using his political connections and writing skills to build support. Lady Ashford became a major fundraiser, leveraging her social contacts for donations. Even Catherine got involved, hosting salons where she introduced wealthy women to the cause. The opposition fought back hard. There were legal challenges, protests that turned violent, constant attacks in conservative media. Eliza received death threats. Someone burned down one of the schools in the middle of the night. The backlash was real and dangerous, but so was the progress. By year 5, they had 28 schools operating and plans for 15 more. Thousands of women had graduated with skills that let them support themselves. And the cultural conversation had shifted irreversibly. Women's education was no longer a radical idea, just a controversial one. It wasn't victory, exactly, but it was movement. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Darian took Eliza back to the field where they'd first met. The old groundskeeper's cottage was still there, more dilapidated than ever, but standing. "I fell here," Eliza said, looking at the ground. "Literally fell off my horse, and somehow that fall led to all of this." "No," Darian corrected. "The fall brought us together, but everything else, the choice to leave, the school, the movement, all of it, that was you deciding to get back up." They stood there in the fading light, and Eliza thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago, scared, obedient, trapped in a life she hadn't chosen. That girl felt like a stranger now. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "What you gave up for me?" "Every day," he said. And when she looked stricken, he smiled. "I regret that I didn't find you sooner, that we wasted time on propriety and fear, that we almost didn't make it here." He pulled her close. "But I don't regret choosing you. Never that. Even though we're poor, scandalous, and constantly under attack, especially because of that, we earned this life. It's ours in a way nothing handed to us could ever be." The movement continued to grow. Other countries started similar programs inspired by the network's success. Women were slowly gaining ground in education, in employment, in public life. The changes were incremental, frustrating, insufficient, but they were real. And every graduate who walked across that stage, every girl who learned she had options, every woman who chose her own path, they were proof that the choice Eliza had made at that altar 5 years ago had mattered. 10 years after the wedding, Eliza stood in front of the original school building. It looked different now: proper repairs, fresh paint, a sign that proudly declared it the founding location of the National Women's Educational Network. Inside, a new generation of teachers was training, preparing to staff the 50 schools they now operated across the country. Margaret found her there, looking contemplative. "Thinking about the early days?" Margaret asked. "Thinking about how terrified I was, how certain I was that we'd fail. We almost did, multiple times, but we didn't. We're still here, still fighting. Does it feel like you thought it would? When you walked away from that wedding, is this what you imagined?" Eliza considered. "I don't think I imagined anything specific. I just knew I couldn't live the life they'd planned for me. Everything else, the school, the movement, all of it, that came from trying to help other women make the same choice I did." "Well, you succeeded, whether you planned to or not." That night, the school hosted a reunion. Former students from across the years gathered to celebrate the anniversary. They were teachers now, clerks, business owners, politicians, writers. One had even become a physician, the first woman licensed in the country. They shared stories of their lives, the obstacles they'd faced, the victories they'd won, and every one of them mentioned the same thing: the moment they'd decided to choose differently and how much that single choice had changed everything. Eliza listened to them and felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly, there was still too much work to do for that, but a sense of rightness, of purpose, fulfilled. Late in the evening, Emily pulled her aside. "I'm getting married," she announced. Eliza's heart sank. To someone I actually love, a teacher at the school in Manchester. We've been writing for 2 years, and he asked me last month. I said I needed to think about it. And I realized I want to marry him, not because Mother wants it, or because it's expected, or because I need security, just because I love him and I want to build a life with him." Emily smiled. "That's the difference, isn't it? Between your almost wedding and mine. I get to choose." "That's everything." The wedding was small, beautiful, nothing like the elaborate production Eliza's was supposed to be. Just family, friends, people who actually cared about the couple getting married. Catherine attended, looking almost happy. Lady Ashford came with her new companion, a woman she'd met through her charitable work, and had moved in with 6 months prior to everyone's shock and no one's real surprise. Even Marcus attended, bringing his wife, a firebrand journalist he'd met while covering labor strikes. They had a daughter, and they were raising her to be as difficult and independent as possible. "Look at us," Marcus said to Eliza during the reception. "The family that scandal built." "Is that what we are? A family?" "I think so. Not the one we were born into, but the one we chose. That has to count for something." It counted for everything. 20 years after the wedding that never was, Eliza stood at the cliff by the cottage watching the sunset. She was 43 now, her hair going gray, her hands permanently rough from years of work. The cottage had been expanded, a second story added, a proper library built, gardens planted along the cliff edge. Darian found her there, moving more slowly than he used to, but still strong, still present. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. How strange life is." "That's vague." "I was 23 when I walked away from that altar, half my life ago now, and sometimes I can barely remember who that girl was, what she wanted, what she feared. Do you miss her?" "No. I feel sorry for her sometimes. She was so scared, so certain she had no choices. But I don't miss being her." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade over the ocean. Behind them, the cottage was warm and alive. Marcus and his family were visiting, along with Emily and her husband. Their children ran wild through the house, loud and chaotic and completely free. The school network had grown to 85 schools now. Women could attend university in limited numbers. They could own property, enter certain professions, vote in local elections. The world had changed, slowly and incompletely, but undeniably. "Was it worth it?" Darian asked. "Everything it cost?" Eliza thought about her father, still in prison for violence born from his inability to control her. About her mother, who'd found a kind of peace but never quite forgiven the scandal. About the years of struggle, the opposition, the constant fight for every inch of progress. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times yes. "No regrets?" "Plenty of regrets, but none about choosing you, none about choosing this life." As darkness fell over the ocean, they walked back to the cottage together. Inside, their chosen family was laughing, arguing, living loudly and without apology. The life Eliza had built from one moment of defiance, one choice to value truth over comfort. She'd stood at an altar once and refused to surrender her life to someone else's vision. And from that refusal, she'd built something that mattered, not just for herself, but for thousands of women who came after. The wedding that never was had led to a life she never imagined. And looking around at the people she loved, the work she'd built, the choices she'd made, Eliza wouldn't change a single moment. She'd chosen freedom. And freedom, it turned out, was worth everything.